Anubhav Vani nectarine words of experience. Param Shraddhi Swamiji Ramsukhdasji's nectarine words. Selected compiled by Rajendra Kumar Dewan, translated from original Hindi by Satinder Diman PhD. A note to the reader: the special quality of the original is hard to capture in a translation. Usually, in translation, several ideas of the author do not get expressed fully. Therefore, the discerning readers are earnestly requested, if they have the knowledge of the Hindi language, to read the original book entitled Anubhav Vani in Hindi. Nectarine words of experience. The world cannot give us what we really want. We want everlasting happiness, immortality, worrylessness, fearlessness, and independence. However, we will not get all this from the world. We will receive these by severing our relationship with the world. We have never been one with the body, nor we are one with the body, nor we will ever be one with the body, nor can we ever be one with the body. And we have never been separate from God, never are, never will be, and can never be separate from God. If there is anything that is farthest most from us, it is the body. If there is anything that is closest most to us, that is God. But man perceives it all upside down in the reverse manner due to desire, attachment, and identification with the body. That is, the body seems near and God seems far away. The body seems attained and God seems unattained. We experience death by retaining our identification with the body. It is not our real nature dharam to be born and to die. Rather, it is the nature dharma of the body. Our lifespan is beginningless and endless agnati and anant, within which many body forms keep on originating and dying. We lose nothing by losing our body. We have assumed and given up countless bodies so far. What difference did that make to our essential reality? What loss did we suffer? We remained just the same. Similarly, our essential reality will remain just the same when this body is abandoned. The soul, shariri, does not really need the body sharir. The soul abides in great peace without the body. In our essential reality, there is no being sought of the other except our own self. As long as the spiritual aspirant keeps a mind-type relationship with the body, till then, despite being engaged in spiritual practices, he does not attain perfection siddhi and remains caught up in auspicious actions, pious contemplation, and attachment with the spiritual state. He may undertake great spiritual sacrifices, austerities, charities, auspicious actions, contemplation of soul and God, or may get established in deep meditative absorption samadhi. Even then his bondage will not end utterly. As long as the feeling the body remains, till then no matter how much spiritual teachings you may hear or preach, and no matter how many spiritual practices you may keep doing, you will not attain your spiritual welfare. It is contrary to logic to consider the body as yours and for yourself. While this illogical relation remains, no spiritual practice can fructify into perfection. No matter how many spiritual austerities one may engage in, how much samadhi states one may abide in, and even if one may journey through worlds and nether worlds, even then one's delusion will not be dispelled and one will not attain the truth of reality satya tattva. Even being immortal in one's essential nature swarup, when one, disregarding the faculty of discrimination vivek, accepts identification with the body whose very nature is to pass away, that is, when one accepts that I am the body, then one feels the fear of death and there arises in oneself the desire for immortality. But when one gives importance to one's vivek that I am not the body always exists in death while the self always abide in immortality, then one experiences one's self-validated immortality. The jiva remains one only. That is why it goes through myriad life forms and myriad worlds. The self that goes through myriad life forms, that self does not get attached to any of those forms and does not get stuck in any of those forms. For if the self were to get attached to or stuck in any of the life forms, then who will go through 84 lakh life forms? Who will go to heaven and hell? Who will get liberated? This is usually stated in the scriptures that only when one renounces the world can one follow the spiritual path and attain spiritual welfare. This conviction is usually settled within the minds of human beings that only by giving up one's home, family, etc., and by becoming a renunciate one attains one's welfare. But the Gita says that no matter what the situation, condition, circumstance, place, time, etc. might be, one can, by making proper use of the circumstances, attain one's welfare. It is usually the experience of all spiritual aspirants that with the arising of intense longing for the spiritual welfare, one starts feeling dispassion towards actions, objects, and persons, family. But due to deep association with the body, this dispassion remains as nothing more than mere desire for convenience and comfort that is an impediment in the progress of spiritual aspirant. The spiritual aspirants have this feeling that they can only progress on the spiritual path only by completely abandoning actions, objects, and persons. In reality, what is required is not to give them up completely swarupsatayag but to give up the attachment to them. When the spiritual aspirant wants to seek his spiritual welfare, then he wants to take leave of action since he considers them as an obstacle in the spiritual practice. In reality, the fault does not lie in the performance of actions, but in doing actions with a selfish motive. That family life is not appropriate. One should become a renunciate and live in the solitude. Thinking along these lines, man wants to change the actions but does not want to give up the selfish desire which is the cause. He does not even think of giving up the cause. If man gives up the selfish desire, all his functions will become right spontaneously. To go to the secluded forests and to lie down there alone and to consider that I am at a solitary place is in fact a mistake. It is because the body, the seat of the entire worldliness, is still with the person. As long as one has relationship with the body, until then complete relationship with the world remains intact. Therefore, going to solitary place is beneficial only when one's main goal is to obliterate the pride in the body dehabhimani. In reality, detachment should be with the body itself. Detachment with the world only strengthens one's ego feeling and does not remove it. In the world, various branches of knowledge, various languages, various scripts, various arts, the knowledge of the 3 worlds and 14 houses, all this is not real knowledge. The reason is that even though such knowledge is useful in the worldly behavior, it is still ignorance only since it binds one to the world. The real knowledge is only that with the help of which one's identification with the body is severed so that one is not born in the world again. In such knowledge, one has no dependence of the world. Those who have not read the scriptures, how will they have knowledge of their prescribed duty? The solution to this quandary is this. If they have the objective of their welfare in mind, then they will spontaneously have the knowledge regarding their duty since necessity is the mother of invention. If we do not have the objective of our welfare in mind, then, despite having read the scriptures, we will not obtain the knowledge of our duty. Rather, only our ignorance will increase that we now know more. What is meant to happen will happen, and what is not meant to happen will not happen whether we desire for it or not. For example, the unfavorable situation comes without desiring for it. Similarly, the favorable situation will also come without desiring for it. If an object is destined to be received, it will be received without even desiring for it. If an object is not destined to be received, it will not be received despite desiring for it. Therefore, obtaining or not obtaining an object is not dependent upon our desire. Rather, it depends upon a certain cosmic law. Where is the difficulty in giving up the desire for an object which is not dependent upon our desire? As a matter of fact, the essential provision for the care of the body is ever provided for on its own. Because the necessary provision for the bodily sustenance of all creatures had been arranged by God all along since the very beginning. In fact, by desiring, we only create greater difficulties in obtaining the essential objects of life. If a person, considering an object as utmost essential for himself, desires it intensely thinking in terms of how to get it, where to get it, when to get it, etc. If one keeps holding on to such an intense desire within his mind, then that desire does not get developed. That is, such a desire is not able to reach the inner psychic organ of perception and takaran of others. Due to this reason, others do not feel, within their inner organ of perception, the desire or the inspiration to give that essential object. If there remains no craving for objects, then life becomes blissful. And if there is no desire to live, then even death becomes blissful. Life is sorrowful only when we crave for objects, and death is painful only when we desire to live. If there is craving for the objects in the heart, then there is bondage, bandhan when one has the objects, and there is bondage when one doesn't have the objects. If there is no craving for the objects in the heart, then there is freedom mukti, when one has the objects, and there is freedom when one does not have the objects. One should also include renouncing the fruit of jap, repetition of divine name, bhajan chanting, and concentration, and samadhi meditative absorption, etc., under the meaning of renunciation. It is because so long as jap, bhajan, and samadhi, etc., are undertaken for one's own sake, till then, due to the continuation of individuality, bondage remains. Thus jap, bhajan, etc., undertaken for one's sake is indeed bondage itself. Therefore, not to have any desire associated with any activity is true renunciation. In true renunciation, one even renounces any identification with the sense of renunciation. If spiritual freedom mukti were attainable by giving up the objects in their entirety, then every dying person would have become spiritually free, for he had given up even his body. But it does not work like this. As long as there is attachment residing in our inner organ of perception and takaran, despite giving up the body, the bondage of the cyclic existence sansa remains. Therefore, it is the worldly attachment that binds a person and not the relationship to worldly peoply objects. A person who becomes religious by performing religious activities only due to his craving for sense gratification, he may have some gratification from sense indulgence, but he cannot have spiritual peace supreme shashvati shanti. Man does not want unfavorable incident to happen, does not do it, and does not have any interest in it. Even then, unfavorable incident happens. Whosoever may be the apparent occasion nimit for such an incident, or one may consider anyone the cause for it. But in reality, God's hand is there in making the incident happen. Verily, God's will is there to make it happen. This is the cosmic law of all-knowing, all-benevolent, and almighty God, that one does not suffer punishment greater than one's misdeed, and whatever punishment one gets is the result of some misdeed. Misdeeds do not neutralize or cancel pious deeds, and pious deeds do not neutralize or cancel misdeeds. If a person, by way of repentance, performs pious deeds to cancel misdeeds, then his misdeeds may get cancelled. If a virtuous soul is experiencing sorrow now, this is the result of misdeed done in some previous lifetime. It is not the result of virtuous deeds performed in this lifetime. In the same manner, whatever happiness a sinful person is experiencing now, it is the result of virtuous actions performed in some previous lifetime. It is not the result of misdeeds performed in this lifetime. A person should never accept that he is not able to perform God's worship due to past misdeeds, because past misdeeds can only fructify in the form of unfavorable circumstances and cannot cause impediments in God's worship. These misdeeds extinguish themselves after generating unfavorable circumstances. To turn towards God is the greatest pious act punya, since it is the root of all pious actions. To turn away from God is the greatest sin, since it is the root of all sins. Turning away from God, they have learned all the languages of the world. They have learned about various branches of knowledge, made various kinds of discoveries, and learned endless kinds of knowledge. However, all this knowledge will not result in their spiritual welfare. They will not become free from the cycle of birth and death. Due to this reason, all these types of knowledge are futile. Whomever the spiritual aspirant considers his own, that object becomes dear on its own. But the real feeling of dearness is towards that object which has these four qualities. 1. With which we have likeness of our own kind or oneness of our form. 2. With which we have an everlasting relationship. 3. From whom we expect nothing. And 4. To whom we surrender everything that we have. These four qualities apply to God only. When a person comes to realize that in this big world, in the infinite universes, nothing belongs to him, but he, in whose one little part are contained infinite universes, alone is our own, then he experiences the necessity for God within himself, for we can call only that object our own which always remains with us and we remain always with it, which does not ever get separated from us and from which we do not ever get separated. Only God can be such an object. There is no other method to attain love other than considering God as our very own. Love is not attained by performing big pious acts like sacrifices, donations, austerities, pilgrimages, fasts, etc. Love is attained by accepting God as our own. There is no method comparable to accepting a sense of belonging to God. No qualification, no strength, and no competence can match it. In accepting God as our own, we do not have to seek any help from mind, intellect, etc. Whereas, in other methods, we need to take help from mind, intellect, etc. Only God is mine and I verily belong to God. No one else is mine and I do not belong to anyone. By invoking a sense of belonging, ownness, with God like this, one attains God immediately and easily. Who considers anyone as his own other than God? He really does not consider God as his own even when he keeps saying for the sake of saying that God is mine. God only looks at the sentiment of ownness anapan in the heart of the devotee and not at devotee's qualities and faults, for God does not see the faults of his devotee. He only perceives the feeling of ownness with the devotee. Being the benevolent heart of every creature, God has no enemies. However, he who mistreats devotees, he is God's enemy. A matter of deep significance. Not to accept God is a greater defect than running after desires. Those who worship deities other than God attain to the world of birth and death if there is any desire left in them. However, those who worship only God, even if some desire is left in them, with God's grace and by virtue of God's worship, they attain to God only. The reason being that whichever way a relationship is formed with God, man attains to God only since, in essence, he is verily a part of God. There is no such law that all the desires of God's devotees will be fulfilled. If God thinks it appropriate, he may fulfill them or may not fulfill them. If it results in the well-being of the devotees, God fulfills their desires. If it does not result in their well-being, God does not fulfill their desires howsoever intensely the devotees may call upon God. A person who worships God with the desire of an object in mind is verily a devotee of that object only. Since, due to the object being the target, he worships God for the sake of the object only and not for the sake of God. This is a matter of deep significance that people become forever dependent upon those objects which they consider to be their own. They remain under the delusion that they are the masters of those objects while in fact they become their slaves. However, the dependence upon others ends forever by accepting God as our own. That is, when a person considers objects and activities as his own, he becomes dependent on others. When he considers God as his own, he becomes forever free. There are different types of devotion depending upon the faith and competence of people, but there is no difference in their ultimate result. The resultant outcome of all types of devotion is one only. One may worship God considering him with attributes and formless, or attributeless and formless, or with attributes and form. In the end, all attain to one God only. All persons attain to one God only. Whether a Brahmin becomes free or a Chandal, both attain the same reality or truth. The difference is only on account of the bodies which are adventitious. There is no difference based on the reality of truth. Whatever truth was attained by such saints of the past as Sanaka etc. is attainable today also. There are no classifications in God such as body and soul, truth and untruth, inert and conscious, with attributes and attributeless, with form and formless. In that one only, there are various spheres vibhag, and in many spheres, there is that one only. This is not a subject of vivek or discrimination or self-inquiry. Rather, it is a subject of reverence and faith. Due to being a particle of God, we cannot be separated from God. We cannot relinquish God. Almighty God also cannot get separated from jivas and cannot relinquish jivas. If God relinquishes jiva, then jiva will become a new God. That is, God will not remain one but will become many, which is not possible. How is he? This question does not arise regarding the one whom we cannot relinquish. Therefore, we should love God without pondering over such questions as, how is God? What is God? The one who is ours is there even now and is within us. That one reality tattva is attained not by doing something, because it is never unattained. That we will do something and then attain it, this sentiment strengthens the idea of pride in body self dehabhiman. When attaining God only becomes the goal of the spiritual aspirant, and when he will also recognize that, from time immemorial, he has had self-proven relationship with God, then no spiritual practice will remain less important for him. A spiritual practice is higher or lower only from the worldly standpoint. In reality, it is the goal that is of primary importance. Without attaining God, man seems to live in comfort and peace. He remains forgetful of his real want. He remains satisfied with the received object, qualification, and competence. If he experiences the necessity for God and cannot live restfully without God, then he will be able to attain God without delay. For what delay will be involved in attaining that which is ever attained? God is not any tree that one has to plant today and get its fruits after years. God is ever present in all places, all times, all objects, all states, and all circumstances. We are the ones who have turned ourselves away from him. God has never turned away from us, ever. If a child wants to go to his mother's lap, he does not need to follow any protocol to do so. He goes to his mother's lap on the strength of his relationship of oneness with her mother, that he is her very own. In the same manner, to attain God, one does not need proper procedures, mantras etc., but only the strong sentiment of ownness anapan. That we will attain God in exchange of some special spiritual practice, quality, qualification, feature etc. This is a totally wrong conviction. It is a rule that anything that is received in exchange of some price is always of less value than the price itself. Therefore, God cannot be bought with the help of any spiritual practice etc. That is, if we are able to attain God in exchange of any spiritual practice, etc. This will tantamount to saying that God is of less value than the spiritual practice itself, according to the principle that anything that is received in exchange of some price is always of less value than the price itself. This will not even pass the test of common sense, let alone passing the test of logic. Even otherwise, if we were to accept that God is attainable in exchange of some price, spiritual practice, qualification, etc., then what benefit will we derive from him? For we already have had an object, spiritual practice, etc., of greater value than God. Person who enjoys worldly sense pleasures with an indulgence mindset, Bodhidil, cannot escape from the sin of the nature of violence. He incurs the sin of violence, downfall against himself as well as against others. The one who enjoys sense pleasures with an indulgence mindset not only heralds his own downfall, he also destroys the objects of sense pleasure by misusing them and incurs violence against those people who need and lack those objects. Those who are busy in the collection and in the indulgence of worldly objects, such persons, though they hear scriptures, yet they verily reflect upon sense objects. They contemplate upon money, and they experience sorrows. A matter of deep significance is that as long as the spiritual aspirant accepts the existence of any reality other than God, till then his mind does not get completely controlled. Man has predisposition to desire, and he also has life current, pranashakti. If the life current ends while predisposition to desire remains, then one is born in a new life form. If the predisposition to desire comes to end, then even if the life current remains, one is not born again. It is a law that if the master let go of a good servant, he will not get a good servant again. Likewise, if the master is good and the servant gives him up, then he will not get a good master again. Similarly, if man, without realizing God, wastes his body in the collection and indulgence of worldly objects only, he will not get the human form again. While the relationship with untrue objects, asat padarth, remains, no matter how much spiritual practice a person may engage in, or may remain absorbed in samadhi, even then he will not be called a yogi according to the doctrine of the Gita. Union yog with God is achieved only by giving up the indulgence in sense pleasures, bhag. When there develops an attachment to or attraction for a worldly thing, person, occurrence, situation, activity, object, etc., that attachment gives birth to aversion towards others. Then one cannot see the deficiencies of the person one is attached to. Likewise, one cannot see the good qualities of a person for whom one has aversion. Attachment and aversion in both of these feelings, the relationship with the world gets established. A person is a speaker or lecturer when he is giving a speech. But when he considers himself an orator during other times also, his pride of doorship does not get extinguished. By always considering himself a public speaker, he develops a feeling in his mind that the listeners should serve me, respect me, and fulfill my needs. And how can sit next to these ordinary people? How can I do this ordinary task, etc.? The orator starts considering the listeners as his own. If one does not have real brother and sister, he finds a Dharam brother and sister. If one does not have a son of his own, he adopts someone else's child. Although, by creating new relationships in this manner, man wishes to get happiness, but he gets unhappiness only. One of the cardinal errors a person makes is that although he considers the received object as his own, but he does not turn his sight at all towards the giver. He sees the received object but does not see the giver at all. He sees the effect but does not see the one by whose power the task has been accomplished. He does not see that cause. In fact, the object is not ours. However, the giver is ours. Every worldly object, person, etc., is continuously proceeding towards destruction. Whatever special beauty, strength, etc., we observe in any object, person, etc., they get destroyed one day. It is as if every worldly object is giving this practical advice. Do not look toward me because I will not endure. Look towards the one who made me. Whatever beauty, competence, uniqueness, etc., is seen in me, it is not mine, but belongs to him. Although, whatever special quality a person may have, it all belongs to God only. Yet if we have benefited or are benefiting from someone, we should be grateful to them, we should serve them. One should be careful though not to get struck in it by considering these qualities as their personal vyaktigat qualities. If a person applies the Vivek logic of discrimination of sat real or true and asat unreal or untrue on his own body, he is ascetic, spiritual aspirant or seeker. If he applies this Vivek logic on the world, then he is Vidvana, learned person. One who discriminates between what is real and what is unreal with regards to the world while keeping himself separate from this logic, that is, not applying the logic of real and unreal with regards to his body. Such a person may become a learned speaker type Enani, but cannot have the real experience of truth. However, by applying the discriminative logic of real and unreal with regards to one's body, one can become a true Jnani, the one who has truly verified the truth of the real and the unreal firsthand in his own self. The devotee who has completely surrendered himself to God accepts and holds strongly to the feeling that I am God's and God is mine. This feeling that I am God's and God is mine cuts the very root of the defects such as fear, sorrow, worry, doubt, etc. That is, the very basis of such defect gets destroyed. Because, from the standpoint of devotion bhakti, all defect find their sustenance due to turning away from God Bhagwan ki vimukta. If we start noticing the qualities of a devotee bhakta in us, then we will start taking pride in them. If we won't see those qualities, we may feel disappointed. Therefore, the best thing is, after taking refuge in God, not to look towards them, not even mistakenly. All such qualities manifest spontaneously in the devotee who has surrendered to God, but he does not pay any attention to whether these qualities are there or not there. In reality, the body is useful for accomplishing worldly tasks. It is not useful for accomplishing anything for one's own self because the body is not meant for us anyway. We need the body to accomplish work in some form or the other. If we do not need to do anything, what purpose we will need the body for? Therefore, trying to do something for ourselves with the help of the body is the fault. We cannot do anything for ourselves with the received object, but we can serve the world with it. The body is a part of the world. Therefore, whatever will happen through it would be for the world. The body is just a device to do actions, and actions are meant only for the world. As when a writer sits down to write, he assumes a pen, and when he has finished writing, he puts away the pen at an appropriate place. In the same manner, the aspirant should admit the body while needing to do actions and should set it aside, as it were, after the work is completed. That is, he should disidentify himself with the body after the work is done. Therefore, if we do not do anything, what purpose we will need the body for? Till present time, in various bodily forms such as a deity, as a human being, animal, bird, demigod, vaksha, demon, etc. Whatever actions had been performed, none of those actions reached our true nature Swarupa, and no bodily form reached our true nature. It is because the category of actions and material objects body is verily different than that of Swarupa. When the Purusha gets established in the individual body Vyashtasharir, then it gets established in totality of Prakriti. It is because the individual body and totality of Prakriti are both the same. Really speaking, there are no individual entities Vyashti. There is only totality of being Samashti. We have presumed individuality mistakenly, as it is a mistake to consider the waves of ocean to be separate from the ocean. Even so, to consider individual body to be separate from the totality of world is verily a mistake. We can perceive the world only once and not the second time. The reason being that the world is ever changing every moment. Thus, an object does not remain the same a moment later as it was a moment ago. A matter of even greater significance than this is that, in reality, the world is not perceived even once. Because the body, the senses, the mind, the intellect, etc., the means through which we perceive the world, they also belong to the world. Thus, in reality, the world is perceived through the means that belong to world. The Swarupa that is ever free of any trace of relationship with the world. With that Swarupa, the world is never perceived. Due to the remaining of the desire for pleasure born of senses coming in contact with their objects, one develops attachment to the world. This attachment does not go away even when one knows the world to be non-real asat or illusory mithya. For example, one gets attached to the scenes, characters, objects of the cinema even when one knows that they are unreal. Or it's like one gets attached while remembering the events of the past to what comes before mind's eye even when one knows it to be unreal. Therefore, as long as one has an internal desire for the pleasures of the world, till then attachment to the world does not end even while accepting the world to be unreal. The unreal asat and the unreal sat, these two are also known by several names such as Prakriti and Purusha, perishable and imperishable, body and soul, eternal and temporal, etc. Whatever is seen, heard, understood, thought, willed, etc., all that is unreal, by virtue of which we see, hear, contemplate, etc., that too is unreal. Despite God, saints, great souls, etc., we have not been liberated. In this, the fault did not lie with the material available for liberation. nor have we been incapable of seeking our welfare. Rather, we have not made ourselves ready for our welfare. That is why all of these means put together have not been able to secure our welfare. If we become ready to seek our welfare and turn ourselves towards it, then, having received the rare gifts such as human birth and the opportunity such as Kali Yuga, we would be able to get liberated several times over. But this will happen only when we ourselves would want to seek our welfare. To date, several incarnations of God have happened, and several types of saints, great souls, liberated in life, and devotees of God have graced the world. But so far we have not been liberated. This also proves that we have not placed our faith shraddha in them. We ourselves have not turned towards them. We ourselves have not listened to them. That is why we have not been liberated. Guru, saints, and God liberate only when a person has faith, trust in them, accepts them, turns towards them, and obeys their command. If a person does not accept them, how can they liberate him? Verily, they cannot. In the real sense, God is also present, the Guru is also present, and the Tattvanana is also present. And the competence and capability of the seeker is also there. Only our attachment with the fleeting pleasures is the obstacle in their manifestation. From the standpoint of world, jiva, and God, we all are at an equal footing. This equanimity samatha has been called yog by the Gita Samadhavam Yoguchyati, BG 248. The difference vishamata is for practical purpose only, which is necessary. Because for practical purposes, samatha is not possible. The difference in practical behavior is quite natural. However, the difference of the feeling has been created by man by his attachment and aversion ragdavash. If one perceives it especially thoughtfully, then samatha is self-evident. This is everyone's experience, that we remain the same person during both the favorable and unfavorable circumstances. If we did not continue to be the same person, then who would have had the knowledge of two separate favorable and unfavorable set of circumstances? From this, it becomes evident that the change takes place in the circumstances and not in our swarupa essential nature. The mistake lies in the fact that we only look towards the circumstances but do not look towards our swarupa. Samatha does not mean that we should behave the same or equally towards everyone in the matters of food and marriage, etc. Practicing samatha in practical matters is the harbinger of great downfall. Equal behavior is characteristic of the Lord of Death Yamara, or death itself, since in their behavior they treat everyone equally. By keeping the behavior pure, the antakaran becomes pure and stainless. But to practice samatha in practical behavior such as eating and drinking leads to impurity in the antakaran and to more restlessness. To keep only the external behavior as equal for everyone is against the propriety meriata of the scriptures and the society. It produces struggle in the society. There are two types of traps, y'all, worldly and scriptural. To get struck in the quagmire of worldly attractions is to be entrapped in the worldly trap. And to get entangled in various viewpoints of scriptures and traditions of duality and non-duality is to be entrapped in the scriptural trap. The worldly trap is like an ounce of entangled yarn soot, while the scriptural trap is like a ton of entangled yarn. The spiritual aspirant should neither have primacy of attachment with the world nor with different opinions based on scriptures religio-philosophical. That is, one should not insist on any viewpoint or religio-philosophical system. By doing so, the spiritual aspirant becomes qualified to undertake the path of yog, mukti, and bhakti. Beyond this, no special qualification is required. It has been observed that even spiritual aspirants, by having special sentiments of being favorable or unfavorable towards a specific tradition or a saint, become victims of attachment and aversion ragdvesh and are not able to cross the ocean of conditioned existence called sansar. This bias towards a particular spiritual tradition acts as a great barrier for an aspirant who is a seeker of reality tattva. The attachment-led insistence on a tradition binds a person. A seeker who looks for easiness in the realization of knowledge of reality, tattvanana, and wants to attain it immediately. Such a seeker is in fact seeker after pleasure and not lover of spiritual practice. He who wants to attain the knowledge of reality easily has to endure difficulty, and he who wants to attain the knowledge of reality immediately has to endure delay. It is because of the desire for easiness and quickness, the seeker's attention, instead of being focused on spiritual practice, gets redirected towards the results. As a result, one feels anxiety in one's heart regarding the spiritual practice, and this results in delay in the attainment of the knowledge of reality. A person whose determination or objective, regardless of what happens, is to attain the knowledge of reality. Such a person does not pay any attention to easiness or quickness. If someone creates difficulty in the spiritual practice of a seeker, it does not lead to anger in his mind, nor does it give birth to the feeling of causing harm or violence. If the seeker feels aversion towards the person causing difficulty, then, to the extent there is feeling of aversion, to that extent it is a sign of lack of steadfastness and insistence on one's spiritual practice. In the seeker, there is something called steadfastness and something called insistence. With steadfastness, there is interest in the spiritual practice, and with insistence, there is attachment in the spiritual practice. With right interest in the spiritual practice, one is able to see shortfalls in one's practice and one receives the strength and motivation to correct them. But with attachment, there is the possibility of developing aversion towards someone who creates obstacles in one's spiritual practice. As a matter of fact, it is only when our interest in the spiritual practice diminishes that someone creates obstacles in our practice. The spiritual aspirant feels happiness, sorrow when he remembers his actions performed in the past. He gets worried. In fact, this too is due to the ego sense. The spiritual aspirant feels happy or sad, ridden by sense of ego and identified with ego. Viewed broadly, as there is absence of past in the present, even so there is the absence of actions performed in the past. Viewed in a subtle manner, as there was absence of present in the past, even so there was absence of past. Likewise, as there is an absence of past in the present, even so there is absence of the present. However, the reality is ever existent. Therefore, the spiritual aspirant should focus exclusively on the existent reality. Like past and future are not existent right now, even so the present is also not existent. The connection point of the past and the future is called the present time. There is a verse in Panini grammar. Nearness to the present is like the present itself. 3.131. If the present ever existed in reality, then it would not have ever transformed itself into the past. In fact, the time, kaya, is not existent in the present. Only God is present. It means that which changes every moment is not the present. Rather, that which never changes is verily the present. The spiritual aspirant should not view it in the manner that if I practice, I will get this result. To think about the fruits of practice is attachment with the results, which affects adversely the practice in the future. Thus, one should not look at the fruit but rather look at the practice itself. And one should practice in a steadfast manner. Then the mastery siddhi will come on its own. If the spiritual aspirant remains focused on the results, then the mastery will elude him. When we will become volitionless and desireless, we will attain great peace. This type of desire to receive pleasures is verily the desire to enjoy the fruit, which does not let the spiritual aspirant become volitionless and desireless. As long as there remains the ego in the seeker, till then he is the enjoyer of sense pleasures. Boji. I am a yogi, this is the Bhag of Yog. I am Anani, this is the Bhag of Jnana. I am Premi, this is the Bhag of Prem. As long as the spiritual aspirant has tendency to seek sense pleasures, till then there remains a possibility of his downfall. A spiritual aspirant does not need to know too much. In trying to know too much, the seeker will have to spend time. But he will have less time left for spiritual practice. The spiritual aspirant should try to develop the habit of experiencing the solitude free of object, person, and any activity. He should give importance to this experience of solitude and should abide in it more and more. Howsoever bad behavior a person might have had or howsoever sinful a person might have been, when he cries in repentance and calls God in that state, God takes him under his care in his lap and loves him. This proves that by turning toward God, when the sins of this lifetime do not create any obstacle, then how the sins from past lifetime could be an obstacle. The fruit of past bad actions presents itself in the form of present birth and unfavorable circumstances only. They past bad actions cannot create any obstacle on the way to God. Am not able to correct my bad qualities and behavior, what should do? Only the pride of the seeker is the cause for such a worry. And that these bad qualities and behavior should be corrected and corrected soon. This proves lack of faith, trust, and anchorage in God. There is nothing bad about not liking bad qualities and behavior. The fault lies in worrying about them. Thus, a spiritual aspirant should never worry. Only God is mine and I am of God's only. This is turning oneself to God. Without turning oneself to God, it is very difficult to turn one's mind and intellect to God. Therefore, this is a pervasive complaint of spiritual aspirants that they are not able to focus their mind and intellect upon God. one can attain the perfection of deep meditative absorption, samadhi, etc. But spiritual welfare will happen only when one turns one's self toward God. The spiritual aspirant should not vacillate from his real nature by identifying himself with mental tendencies that are subject to change. Whatever tendencies appear, one should not become happy or sad on account of them, and one should not identify oneself with them. Not to see one's real nature anaswarupa, that is ever blissfully same, untouched by qualities, stainless and eternal, and to see mental tendencies that are changeable, flawed, and fleeting. This is a great barrier for the spiritual aspirant. It is important for the spiritual aspirant that he should not consider the body self as his real self. The mental tendencies belong to antakaran mind, intellect, memory, ego, etc., and not to our real self. Therefore, the seeker should not consider mental tendencies either good or bad, nor should he consider them as belonging to his real self. It is very important for a spiritual aspirant to engage in spiritual practices of chanting, etc., for there is no finest activity like them. But to believe that one can attain the supreme reality of Godhead through spiritual practices is not right. Such a belief inflates the ego of the seeker, which is an obstacle in the realization of God. God is realized through grace. God cannot be bought by any spiritual practice. It is God's kind nature that he does look at what the spiritual aspirant does. Rather, he looks at what the aspirant really wants. Today, the reason for the spiritual aspirants not attaining the higher state in experiencing the Supreme Godhead or facing obstacles in experiencing the Supreme Godhead is just this: the craving for sense pleasures. The main obstacle in the way of spiritual practice is the craving for sense pleasures. This obstacle stays on the path for a long haul. Wherever the seeker enjoys sense pleasures, he gets struck right there. Even so, if he enjoys the pleasure of deep meditative absorption samadhi, he gets struck in that too. Our welfare lies in the welfare of others. It is a mistake to assume our welfare to be separate from the welfare of others. Therefore, all worldly and prescribed actions should be performed for the welfare of the world. Any act done for one's own pleasure verily results in bondage. Any act done for our own sake also creates bondage. To mind one's self-interest only reinforces the sense of individuality. Therefore, even chanting, contemplation, meditation, and samadhi should be performed for the welfare of the world. Lockit. In fact, to engage in spiritual practices for the sake of liberation mukti or to attain God is also attachment with the fruit of actions. Man has developed a habit that he does everything with the motive of getting results of actions. That is why it is said that one should do spiritual practice in order to attain mukti or to attain God. In fact, the sadhan is undertaken to undo the asadhan. Spiritual freedom, mukti, is ever attained. God is ever attained. Attainment of God is not the result of any action. Thus, to think that God will be attained by doing something is verily the desire for the fruit of actions. Every action has a time for it. There is a designated time to go to sleep and to wake up. Designated time to do daily functions. Designated time go to work for earning a livelihood. Designated time for meals, etc., etc. But there should not be such time division for remembering God. We should remember God all the time. It is very important for the spiritual aspirant to keep steadfastly contemplating upon God during the time set for meditation. During the time for practical matters also, the seeker should keep remembering God while performing tasks in an unattached manner. It is because not remembering God during the time of practical matters leads to an increased attachment to the world. That is, the aspiration of the aspirant should be alertly alive all the time. He should include God in the world but should not mix the world in God. In other words, he should keep contemplating God while performing worldly actions. One who is seeker is not seeker just for an hour or two, but for 24 hours. The spiritual seekers often say that during the satsang, the matter of giving up these faults feels good and easy to do. But in practice, it is not easy to do. They want to give up faults, but are not able to. The main reason for not being able to give them up is the craving for worldly pleasures. The spiritual aspirant's mistake lies in the fact that he wants worldly pleasures while also trying to be free from the faults. It is like a person who loves sweets and wants to give them up, while at the same time wanting to enjoy their sweetness. The ease or difficulty of any spiritual practice depends upon the interest and aim of the spiritual aspirant. The practice becomes easy when the interest and the aim is one God only. The practice becomes really difficult when the interest lies in the world and the aim is to attain God. All worldly spiritual activities, from eating, drinking, sleeping, waking, etc., to chanting, meditation, samadhi, are taking place in Prakriti itself. Without association with Prakriti, no activity is possible. Therefore, the spiritual aspirant should not give up spiritual activities but should not assume any sense of doership in them. That is, he should not consider them as performed by himself or for himself. Whether an activity is worldly or it is of spiritual nature, to give it any importance is to give importance to internus only. Being prescribed by the scriptures, whatever special importance is assigned to spiritual activities in one's antakaran, such importance is also the importance of grossness and hence acts as a barrier for the spiritual aspirants. What one wants, if that does not happen, and what one does not want, if that happens, this is called sorrow. Where is the sorrow, if one gives up this wanting and not wanting? To desire pleasure in order to end sorrow is the root of all sorrow. It is a law that one who is miserable himself gives misery to others. When a person gives misery to others, they on whom the misery has been inflicted suffer only to the extent warranted by their destiny prarabdha. However, those who inflict misery, they incur greater sin whose fruit they have to reap in hell. Actions are performed externally. That is why we reap their fruit also in the form of external circumstances. But we experience internally the happiness and sorrow brought about by those circumstances. Therefore, feeling happiness and sorrow in those circumstances is the result of our own folly and not due to our prarabdha. We have to serve everyone. However, those relatives whose responsibility rests on us, we have to serve them first of all. All the assumed relationships in the world are meant only to help each other or to serve each other. They are not meant for our own sake. The feeling of giving leads to unity and love in the society. The feeling of taking leads to struggle. The sentiment of giving bestows spiritual welfare. The sentiment of taking augurs downfall. From the standpoint of providing service, everyone is our own. But from the standpoint of receiving service, no one is our own. To say nothing of the world, even God is not our own from the standpoint of getting anything from God. In other words, we are not to get anything from God. Rather, we have to surrender ourselves to God. The reason is this. What we really need and what is beneficial to us, God has already granted us that unasked in great abundance. People demand their rights and do not fulfill their duties. This is the root cause of present-day restlessness, rift, and struggle. Employing worldly objects in the service of the world is not any matter of pious charity. Rather, it is a way to be free from the servitude of those objects. Only those can truly serve who do not want anything for themselves. The desire for wealth, etc., in order to serve, is verily a disguised craving kamna. Even the desire to serve is also a form of craving since it leads to the craving for objects such as wealth, etc. Therefore, when one gets an opportunity and has the competence, one should surely serve. But one should not crave for it. This is a cosmic law that when we serve out of pure heart love, we arouse a desire to serve even in the hearts of those whom we serve. If the desire to serve does not arise in the heart of the one who is served, then the spiritual aspirant should understand that there has been something lacking in the service itself. It means that we have entertained the desire to get or achieve something through service. Not causing any misery pain to anyone is better than serving. Service starts happening on its own spontaneously when we cease to cause any pain to anyone. When we cease to cause any harm to anyone. One does not take any pride in an activity that happens on its own and one does not have any desire to reap its fruit either. By abandoning the pride of doership and the desire to reap fruit, we receive that which is truly ours. If the bad feeling from the inside has not been removed, and one does good from the outside, this will give birth to pride, which is the root cause of all demonic qualities. Pride in doing good arises only when there is some form of evil present inside. Everyone's existence becomes possible through mutual help. The life of even the wealthiest person is not possible without the help of others. If we have received from someone, it also becomes our supreme duty to give back, to help, and to serve. This is called karma yoga, the path of selfless service. To give objects away for others and to serve with our body is not the only way to do service. But performing actions with the purpose of doing good to others, to provide them happiness without expecting anything for our own sake is true service. One should not even have the thought of being called a servant. Men, animals, trees, houses, etc. are separate, but their isness remains as the same one only. Similarly, in expressions I am man, I am animal, I am an angel, etc. The bodies are different but emness or isness remains the same one only. The God reality, Paramatma Tattva, is of the nature of isness or being, and the world is of the nature of non-being. It is a matter of deep significance that when we look at being we do not perceive its pure being. But when we look at non-being as non-being we perceive being or isness in its pure form. It is because to see being we will have to employ mind, intellect, or their modifications, all of which are a part of the non-being. So, along with being, mental modifications of non-being type will also remain included. However, by perceiving non-being as non-beingness, the mental modifications will get subsumed in non-being and only the pure being will remain. In the enjoyment of sense pleasures, only the emness hun and not the isness gets drawn in. Only the emness becomes the doer and enjoyer of actions. The isness or being never becomes the doer or enjoyer. Thus, the spiritual aspirant should disregard the emness and should try to experience the isness or being. The Sun God does not prompt either the prescribed or the non-prescribed actions. It provides light to all. But whether someone puts the sunlight to proper use or misuses it, the Sun God has no contribution in this. If it had anything to do with the sun, then the sun would have been responsible for the good or the bad deeds. Likewise, the conscious principle Chantatav provides sustenance and strength to Prakriti, but it does not become the initiator of any activity. The spiritual aspirant should ponder over whether his attention remains focused on his own motives or on the conduct of others. By focusing on others, the vision that bestows spiritual welfare gets shut and becomes dark. Therefore, one should look at the real nature Vastvik Swarupa of others and not at their good or bad conduct. We should not notice the fault of others. Rather, we should look at our own faults and try to correct them. We should preach to our own self. We should become our own spiritual preceptor guru, our own leader, and our own ruler. In all pursuits undertaken by the body, activity is predominant. The activity is performed for the sake of the world because the body is a part of the world. But in the pursuits initiated by the self, feeling is predominant. That is why, to be free from wickedness, to be free from attachment, to accept God as our very own, these are the pursuits of the self. May be free from evil, may become unattached, may I become a devotee of God. To experience such a need is also the pursuit of the self. All scriptures, spiritual traditions, etc. discuss various forms of jiva, world, and God. If one looks at them insightfully, one realizes that whatever may be the nature of jiva as described in them, but in considering that I am the jiva they all are of one opinion. Whatsoever may be the nature of the world according to them, but in stating that the world needs to be renounced they all are of one opinion. And whatever may be the nature of God described in them, but in asserting that God is to attain, they all are of one opinion. Really speaking, our enemy does good to us always. He cannot do any harm to us at all. It is because the enemy's reach is only up to the world of objects and not up to the realm of our own self at all. Thus, what more harm can he do other than destroying the destroyable? Only our good lies in the destruction of the destroyable. Actually, our harm occurs when we give in, from the standpoint of the feelings. If the spiritual aspirant approaches the world in the worldly form, he should serve it. If he approaches it in the godly form, he should worship it. He should not do anything for his own self. To perform actions only for one's own sake is bondage. To perform them for the sake of the world is service. And to perform them for God's sake is worship. To worship someone, to feed someone, to show the path to someone, one should consider God as the recipient of all such pious acts. The God and not the person should remain the object of all our pious actions. In fact, it is not the reality of the world that causes the bondage, but it is the accepted relationship of attachment with the world that causes bondage. The reality itself is not the bondage. The attachment rag is the bondage. Therefore, whereas other philosophers describe the world as real or non-real, etc., the Lord in the Bhagavad Gita recommends severing the relationship sambandha vicheda with the world. By severing our relationship with the world ceases to exist as G-world and is seen in its godly form Vasudeva Sarvam. Although woman in reality is a representation of the birth principle, yet a person who is attached to the woman fails to see her in the motherly form. In the same manner, although the world is of the godly nature Bhagavad Rup, yet the person struck in sense gratification is not able to see the world in its godly form. This attachment to sense gratification alone is responsible for accepting the appearance of the world. Everything that is being seen, heard, and thought in the gross, subtle, immovable world is verily the eternal God. In order to experience this truth, the spiritual aspirant should accept this as fact with determination, whether it is understood or not, experienced or not, acceptable or not. He should see his Ishta Bhagavan in whatever is seen: tree, river, mountain, stone, wall, etc., and pray like this: O Lord, grant me your love. O God, I offer my obeisance to thee. By doing so, he will start seeing God everywhere. Because, in reality, everything is verily God. God is all there is. This is meditation with open eyes. In this, one does not need to close one's eyes as in dhyana, or to close one's ears as in nadanyasanda, or to close one's nose as in pranayama. The main fault is to accept the reality and the importance of the world and to establish relationship with them. The main quality is to accept the reality and importance of God and to establish relationship with it. The main fault and main quality appear in various forms due to the difference in configuration stanbita. The spiritual aspirant should accept the following three things to relinquish assumed relationship with the world. 1. The body is not mine, since I have no control over it. 2. I do not need anything. And 3. I do not need to do anything for myself. As long as the spiritual aspirant remains identified with the three bodies, the gross, subtle, and causal body, till then, actions performed by the gross body, contemplation performed by the subtle body, and steadiness performed by the causal body, all three type of actions are of binding nature. In order to awaken the ever-existent association with God, the spiritual aspirant should accept three things. 1. God is mine. 2. I am God's. And 3. Everything is God's. With the awakening of ever-existent association with God, the spiritual aspirant attains God's love. And in the attainment of God's love lies the fulfillment of human life. We are not of this birth and death-prone world. This is not our country. We are not of this country's. Its objects are not ours. We are not of its objects. These are not our relatives. We are not of these relatives. We are only of God's, and only God is ours. Due to the lack of perfect yearning and intensity to know a subject, as well as due to not having one's own question, usually, a spiritual aspirant is not able to fully benefit from the deeply significant matters heard during the satsang and read in the scriptures. Therefore, the spiritual aspirant should try to enshrine in his life whatever is read and heard, considering these matters as meant verily for his own sake. Param Shri Swamiji Shri Ramsukhdasji Maharaj Shri Paramatamni Nama. Main principles of Swamiji Shri Ramsukhdasji Maharaj. 1. Human beings alone have the birthright to attain God. 2. Human beings can attain God regardless of their color, caste, creed, religion, origin, tradition, appearance, etc. 3. Human beings can attain God under all circumstances. For this, they do not have to change the circumstances. 4. Attainment of God is unlike the attainment of worldly objects. Worldly objects are attained by performing actions. However, God is attained by not doing anything for one's own sake. In the attainment of God, feeling, bhav, and discriminative judgment, viv, are the most important and not any activity. 5. God is not attained through gross elements, body, senses, mind, intellect. Rather, God is attained by renouncing our relation with grossness, jada.